welcome to this week's Riks Round Up by Riks Europe. My name is Hannah, and panel today is Elias Norgren and Peter Klipp. Welcome back.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Topics of today: Switzerland rejects inheritance tax initiative by referendum. Secondly, we will talk about the EU Commissioner Svar Hailey's EU food tax plan that sparks backlash inside European Commission. Lastly, we will discuss the Belgian foreign minister that warns that Euroclear confiscation of Russian assets would amount to bankrupting. Peter, can you introduce us to the first topic?
Well, yeah, there was some good news from Switzerland, from the sort of point of democracy, where around 80% of Swiss just decided to reject by referendum an idea to drastically increase the inheritance tax people need to pay, when they are very wealthy. So, and the interesting thing here is, I think, despite the fact that most Swiss would actually not be touched by this measure, they still decided to reject it because they understand that if you chase out the wealthy out of your country, ultimately everybody's gonna suffer. And obviously, just like in other countries, if you look at how much the wealthy already contribute to the state budget, I mean, those are very sizable amount. They contribute disproportionately, whatever metric you choose. So it's really delightful to see that a referendum, which has often been described as an instrument for populism and whatnot by the political class, they absolutely do not like referendums. Is actually producing pretty mature results. A number of years ago, the Swiss public also, they rejected the idea of a very high minimum salary. I think it was 4,000 euro a month, in Switzerland, so life is slightly expensive there. But again, you could see how, people are actually adults. They really can be trusted by these kind of important decisions. So yeah, I thought that was, a very welcome sign.
Yeah, and it's quite quaint actually to see that you have popular referendums like this where people are, the will of the people is actually reflected. That you can actually have these types of things in Europe still, even in the 2020s. And obviously, Switzerland is not part of the EU, and that probably helps. So you have all of these voices in the rest of Europe that are very opposed to public referendums like this, direct democracy. And it basically outshines everything that is happening elsewhere in Europe, where we have all of this rigid bureaucracy. We have Brussels dictating many things. So it's very refreshing indeed to see that the Swiss have decided to reject some of these measures that are usually associated to like socialism and all of these other harmful ideologies that have done a lot of damage to Europe in the past. Now in Sweden, we actually abolished the inheritance tax sometimes in the 2000s, I believe, and this was a very, very like extraordinary act that sort of signaled the end of this type of old-fashioned socialism that you tend to still see in a lot of parts of Europe. But obviously the Swiss have decided to reject that in this particular instance, and that's a sign of a different type of civic duty that I think you were alluding to this, Peter, that the Swiss people have chosen to be responsible, to take responsibility for their society and for their own rights, essentially, with this referendum. And I think that's again very refreshing, because you don't really see this in many European countries, because they don't really have the types like the structures to really enable this type of direct democracy that Switzerland has. So good on them.
It's time for us to look closer at the EU food tax plan that sparks backlash inside the European Commission. Could you help us out more there?
Yeah, well, just like the Swiss people mostly do everything right, the European Commission tends to get everything wrong. But maybe now, this time, there's some hope that they may get it right, because what's happening, the European Commissioner for Health Policy, the Hungarian gentleman Oliver Varhelyi, Never mind that the Commission should probably not have any powers over health policy. He proposed, you will never guess it, a new tax on salt, sugar, processed foods, whatnot. I mean, probably a lot of things that are not very healthy, but the question is, do we need the nannycrats of the European Commission to tell us what to eat? I mean, at what point are they going to stop? You would think, Mr. Varhely and his colleague, Mr. Hoekstra, the Dutch commissioner, they have been pushing for a massive tobacco tax. And surprise, surprise, they want most of that, or a sizable amount of that money, to go to the EU budget, going completely against sort of the evidence where if you tax these unhealthy products, you will drive, the black market. People will start smoking all kinds of, unhealthy or even more unhealthy, illegally produced cigarettes with metals and whatnot, without any controls, without liability for the people producing those things. So there's a backlash from the member states. Sweden is against this tobacco tax, but now even within the European Commission, we see other DGs, notably DG Grow, which apparently has still some bureaucrats that care about growing the European economy. That's why it's called DG Grow, Directorate General Grow. They are against this, and they say, look, this is actually probably not the power of the EU level to engage in this kind of taxation. There will be subsidiarity blowback. Also, scientifically, it's not so easy to figure out what is healthy food, what is unhealthy food, as it appears. So, at least, I guess, some light in the darkness of the European Commission, that some sense still seems to be around there.
Yeah, and one of the one of the pillars, the fundamental theories of the European Union is obviously that you shouldn't have a planned economy. You shouldn't have an excessively interventionist economy, and that one of the pillars of free trade essentially. And this is used to be some of the values that the EU was holding very high upon its foundation, and they continue to rhetorically hold these values very high, but time and time again, it shows, they demonstrate, the European Commission, they demonstrate that as long as they can line their own pockets, essentially, by violating these values, then they will do that. Essentially, especially if you also consider this trade war type of deal that we have just started with China, that we have going on with various parts of the world regarding, them not living up to very specific environmental regulations, for example. There's plenty of examples of that. So this is just once again shows just how opportunistic the European Union is to actually to take advantage of any opportunity to extract more money out of the member states in ways that most EU member state citizens probably are not really prepared for. I mean, we've always heard this description of the EU is that, it's a it's a cooperation. It's an organization for cooperating between European countries. It's not a supranational organization. It's not a super state. But that's obviously the direction that we're heading in with this. And especially also when it comes to taxing essentially candy, taxing soda, and all of these other types of products that are going to be the target of this directive. You're creating very much the conditions for a very vast black market, actually, because unlike tobacco, which is it's a kind of marginal product. It's mainly used by adults, mainly some adults. I mean, not all people smoke, but most people, including children, are going to be consuming some type of high sugar goods, high salt goods. It's ultra processed fast food, essentially, of some kind. So there's very much the danger that this is going to spiral into an uncontrollable black market with the way that this is heading. So it very much depends on what type of good that you're applying these types of measures to as well, when it comes to the danger of sort of, really endangering the health of your citizens by giving rise to this uncontrollable behemoth of a black market.
And could you tell us why the Belgian minister now warns that Euroclear confiscation of Russian assets would amount to bankrupting?
Well, yes, Hannah, this is absolutely the sort of the leading topic in Brussels at the moment. So what's happening? United States is no longer supporting Ukraine financially. I mean, they still give intelligence. So European countries now want to pick up the tab and send money to Ukraine. Problem is that they're a little short on cash. Now, Russian assets have been frozen in Belgium. Why in Belgium? Because in Belgium you have a company called Euroclear, which is basically holding most of the sort of the assets and stocks that are traded globally. So if you know, some Russian investor buys some stocks, often, you know, this is happening through this Belgian custodian company. Now, of course, the reason why most investors and most financial institutions use Euroclear is because they trust that the Belgian state will not suddenly grab the assets that are there. So this is all based on trust. And what's basically happening is that a number of countries are saying, look, why don't we sort of confiscate the assets from Russia that have already been frozen? Freezing is, of course, one thing. Confiscation is a different one. For example, in the first Gulf War, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the Iraqi assets were frozen, but they were only confiscated after Iraq agreed to this in some kind of a peace deal, because remember then Saddam Hussein suffered a terrible defeat thanks to the fact that the United States intervened in the first Gulf War. So there's no precedent for this. What people say is, look, if this happens, then Russia may start confiscating European assets, or Russia and China or Russia-friendly states may do so. Russia may start conducting lawsuits against Belgium and actually gain the upper hand, because remember, the Belgian government does not control the Belgian courts. You know, we're still supposed to be a democracy where that kind of things, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. Now, the Belgian PM, the Prime Minister, has been viciously opposed to European Commission proposals to seize those assets. And now the Foreign Minister of Belgium has said, if this happens, then Belgium may go bankrupt, because we're talking about such a massive amount of money. I think it's at least 100 billion euro that would be seized, 140 if I'm not mistaken. Then of course the Belgian government would not be able to, you know, compensate Russian investors in case they would get their way in the courts. Also, this may appear a lot of money, but it would only help Ukraine for 1.5 years. A very last important bit is that the Foreign Minister disclosed that the European Commission is currently considering on sort of deciding this through qualified majority voting, which means that they would try to use the procedure so Belgium could be outvoted. So that would be quite something if European countries would vote to basically bankrupt Belgium. It's not exactly, I think, the reason why the European Union was set up. And I think it shows how completely out of control the European Commission is. The fact that they are proposing these kind of things, that they are trying to blackmail. Of course, this is never going to happen. But this shows that we really need to contemplate fundamental reform with the European Commission. I think we probably need to completely fire the whole top ranks of the Commission and only rehire the bureaucrats that are supportive of the idea that they are the servant and not the master of the member states.
Yeah, and this is just basically just another another example of how, like, just the sheer incompetency with which the EU in particular, but Europe at large, is being governed right now. Because I mean, Belgium used to be an industrialized country. Most countries in Europe used to have a very solid industrial base, but they no longer have that type of economic power. So what they rely on now, most of the European countries at least, is essentially being centers of finance. So the service sector has outgrown the manufacturing sector, obviously. And to make a comparison with Switzerland, that's where the citizens obviously voted to retain that sort of attraction as a place to live because they have good services. They're going to protect your right to your own money. They're going to protect your property. If Belgium does not protect the property of Russian investors, then that means that they don't respect property rights, and that means your whole service sector is going to collapse. You don't have an industrial sector to actually fall back on, and that's one of the problems that Europe has been enduring. Obviously, during this Cold War with Russia, we don't have the industrial power to actually match the threats that we're making. The type of the peacock outfit that we're donning right now. Our economic power doesn't match that because we're based on respecting the rule of law and having structures where a Russian investor might actually win against the government or against the European Commission, for example. That's not going to play in our favor if we're going to be so arbitrary and actually break the law, essentially, in trying to combat whatever Russia is trying to do in Ukraine. So that's obviously, the fact that this is being considered and the fact that there's a risk that this might actually happen, as you described there, Peter. They only want a qualified majority for this to be able to happen. They're going to overrule Belgium's own veto in this on this particular issue. It's just a staggering amount of incompetency, really. That's all I can really say about that without using harsher words, and it's frightening.
Thank you so much, Elias and Peter, for your insights today.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.